is Kirk Brown, and I've been involved with energy and energy-related things for quite a long time. I suppose in some ways you could say it goes back to my PhD thesis, which involved heat transfer and fluid mechanics and things like that, which are all energy-related. I left there and went to work for Exxon for about 7 years in the States, so I got involved with the oil industry a bit and see the way it worked to some extent. Went from there to the Ontario Research Foundation. Never seemed to like to stay longer than 7 years in any one job. Yes. My wife says anytime you started making money, it was time to move on.
Yes.
But anyway, at Ontario Research Foundation, it's where the sort of the first energy crisis, if you'll call it that, first started. So I was there from 70 to 77. And in about 74, I think it was late 74, the Ontario government set up an energy ministry. And Darcy McHugh was the minister in charge. They had a very small department, and they were trying to get some things done. And one of their areas of interest was, of course, in energy conservation, as it was called then, or we might call it, we seem to prefer to call it energy efficiency now, because conservation sounds as though it's something that's going to hurt you. You know, come on, you don't want to use those words.
And that the use of the word energy in the ministry in those days was
it was pretty new. Yeah, I think it was their first energy ministry. It was almost finally a recognition that energy powers absolutely everything. I mean, there's nothing we can do without energy from some place. So anyway, they were looking for some help to put together an energy conservation program. And I was seconded from Ontario Research Foundation to the ministry, and I worked there for about 6 months, putting together an energy conservation program. So it was sort of Ontario's first energy conservation program. I think I still have a copy of the report somewhere in the boxes of files that are in the barn, but that's about it for that. The deputy minister said I had done a good job and sent me back to Ontario Research Foundation, where they made me manager of the energy group, because then it was obvious that energy was going to be something important in the near and perhaps distant future. But the end of that would have been 76 that I saw an ad in the Globe and Mail for a director of research for the Institute of Man and Resources. And I applied for that, and I guess it was at the end of 76 that they notified me that I was the person to have the job. And I've been down for interviews and that kind of thing with Andy and a group. I think I could remember them if I tried hard, but I don't know how important that is to blogging. So I came here and started on April 1st, actually, of 1977, April Fool's Day, as you know. But that's when the Canada PEI agreement on renewable energy development and conservation, I don't know if that was in the title or not, but that was the basic title. And we had $6 million altogether, hypothetically $3 million in cash from the feds and some contributions in kind, and hopefully some cash from the province. But it's always hard, as you're aware, in politics to figure out what's fair and what's not fair. And the province is always trying to squeeze as much as it can out of every dollar, and it was then and it is now.
But the notion of...
the notion of conservation came from Andy Wells and Alec Campbell, I think. Probably Andy, the instigator, principally, because he felt we needed to do something here. Prices of oil and so on were going up. We were totally dependent on it, and he felt we could do better. So anyway, the agreement called for specific things to do research on, and the ideas had been developed largely by I would say a fellow by the name of Bill Zimmerman, who Andy met at a conference, heard this guy standing up, make all kinds of statements about energy, what we should be doing. And so he got a hold of Bill and worked with him to put a program together. And Peter Middleton from Middleton Associates, a consulting firm out of Toronto. And Peter was really good at dealing with government and so on. In fact, the agreement itself, I understand, even into some some guy's office in Ottawa, and it was literally in the wastebasket. So he got it hauled out and reworked it. He was a marvel. I remember working with him and saying, well, we needed a proposal on some particular thing. And he did it that afternoon. It would have taken me a week to put anything like that together, but Peter was particularly good at that kind of thing. So anyway, between Bill and Peter and Andy and Alec Campbell and so on, they really got the whole agreement together.
And you're not from here?
No,
Had you been here before?
Oh, we had visited once. Okay. When I was working with Exxon, I was sent on a foreign assignment, if you will, to Halifax and Dartmouth to do a project at the refinery there.
And did you have any sense when you came to start your job on April 1st as to what you were getting into? And
I think in a lot of, what I thought I was getting into was a job description that appeared with the ad for the job. And it just sounded like it was written for me because it was somebody who had an interest in energy. It'd be nice to have some agricultural background. All of those kinds of things that just seemed to be for me. And
did it strike you? I mean, it strikes me looking back that the institute, in terms of what had come before and the culture that gave birth to it, it almost seems like a miracle.
That it happened at all?
That it happened at all, and that the right forces came together to allow it to spring to life at that time.
Yeah, it was a bit of a miracle, I think. Yeah. And I really have to give Andy almost all the credit for it, because he pushed very hard. And he created the Institute of Management Resources as a not-for-profit, separate from government organization. So it was a Part 2 company, as we call them, maybe elsewhere as well as in PEI. And it was really he who brought it together. And being Alex's principal secretary, it was seen as a political job to keep Andy employed, kind of thing, by a lot of the opposition party.
Yes.
So
but there's no doubting, I mean, that Andy's heart was in it.
Oh, absolutely. No, he really felt that then, and I think he still feels it now.
So when you arrived on PEI in 76?
77.
Just looking from a very bird's eye view, what did you find in terms of the energy situation here? What was the island like then, and what were the challenges ahead of you?
It was like any other place, really. You had a whole housing stock that needed a lot of help. There was no thought of any of the renewable energy. The closest thing to renewable energy then was really wood. Right. And people were burning wood. And that was one of the things we did early on, was to do a survey, because we had some money, to find out how much wood was actually being used. Because there were, I don't know whether anybody really knew, I don't think they did. So we just did it as a telephone survey. I hired some guy to spend a little time calling people and saying how much wood did you use last year, And so that was about it. But the program itself called for looking at all the renewables, the wood, wind, solar. We separated those, not like the Americans, they call solar all those three kinds of things pretty well. And energy efficiency. And it was principally oriented towards what the individual used, not towards companies and those kinds of things. So it was pretty much, what can we do to help people to get by in view of probable increases in energy prices?
And that was the driving force, was it?
I think the increase in energy costs. I can remember working at Exxon. There was a lot of talk around the company at one time, because I worked in the engineering department in Florham Park. And they were saying that, if oil ever reaches $5 a barrel, we'll be making oil from the shale. So it was a shale project. Right. They were just beginning to develop the Alaskan discoveries at the time that I left. Up till then, I came into what was a department that was involved with new energies, or new ways of spending money, actually, not so much energies. But Exxon thought, geez, we've got all these profits, what are we going to do with them? So there was a lot of research into alternatives, such as growing protein from petroleum directly, So they went around refineries and dug up bugs from all around the tanks, saw which bugs grew the fastest and what kind of proteins they had and those kinds of things. They were working on fuel cells too. George Cyprius was in my department, and George was an engineer working. He actually got his picture in Time magazine at one time with the drill powered from the fuel cell. So, in some ways, all of these things came to a halt. Another one I worked in was the Halifax project that involved reducing iron ore in a fluidized bed. It would be a lot cheaper, they thought, than making it in blast furnaces for small countries and for small places where the demands were relatively small for this kind of stuff. So anyway, all these new project things died because they had to develop, they got into environmental problems. So they were having to do something about the environment because people were becoming environmentally conscious. And they got into the Alaska project, which took a big hunk of money out of their profits to develop that process, or those fields, those oil fields.
So if the sudden rise in energy prices was sort of the spark that, that gave birth to this, it seems, I mean, if you read the material that describes the enabling legislation for the Institute, for example, it seems as though there was, to some extent, a broader, more ecological view of things as well. And where did that come from? I mean, but that
was out of Andy. He just felt that I suppose, going back to the old days, when people raised their own food on their own farms. Right. And the change to this large scale, many acres, lots of equipment and burning fuels and so on, maybe wasn't going to pay off.
Did you arrive with that sensibility yourself? I mean, were you prepared to take an ecological approach to research, or was that new for you?
Yeah, I think I was. I just felt that energy, I recognized then. Oh, the other thing that came out about the same time was the Club of Rome report. And that came out while I was at Ontario Research Foundation. And the people from the Club of Rome came home and talked to us there. We gave us a lecture. And we had a guy from the federal government again who came to talk with us. I think he was with CMHC, and he was kind of backgrounding their research. And one of the things he said was that if you're thinking in terms of retirement and all you're doing is putting away money, you're still subject to inflation. And that the best way to do it will be to isolate yourself from the internet and the rest of the economy if you possibly could, take care of yourself. And it appealed to me. I had worked on a farm as a kid. I wasn't a farmer. I wasn't a farmer's son. But the summer I was 14, my dad got me a job on a farm. And he had bought a farm in the meantime that we lived on, but not being farmers. But I think it was the best job I ever had in a lot of ways. Just learned everything about doing all of these things manually, and the physical work and everything else really appealed to me. So I guess it was part of my nature to want to do those kinds of things.
So you had a systems understanding from
definitely. No, I certainly had that kind of agricultural background.
So what did you land in 1977? Yeah. What did you start doing?
Tried getting into all these elements of the program. We hired Malcolm Lodge to take care of the WID program. A little bit later on, we hired Rob Brandon to take care of our wood program. And we had Stuart Benny looking after housing, those kinds of things. He had come from the Housing Corporation in the province. We hired Martha Musgrove, who had been with The Guardian, to take care of our public relations and information stuff. She's excellent at writing reports. She could understand what we were doing and write it up so that other people could understand it. I remember a secretary saying one time, Bill Zimmerman and I did a boardroom talking, and she could overhear us. She said, I didn't believe that I could listen to two people talking for 15 minutes and not understand a word they said in English.
I'm familiar with that phenomenon in my field.
Yeah. So it's, I'm sure I did the same thing talking about computers. My first bit of computers when I was doing my PhD, and I worked with a program where you had to write everything in Fortran. It was just called Fortran. It wasn't Fortran 1 or anything, just Fortran. And so I always enjoyed that kind of stuff too. But
so you had some resources at your
disposal,
we had money and
resources.
People.
We had the money. That was the thing, and we hired some people, put them in charge of implementing the work that had been described in the in the original Canada PEI Renewable Energy Development Agreement.
Now, when your position was a research position,
It was director of research, so I was in charge.
And to what extent were you doing sort of original or pure research versus taking existing technologies and applying them on the ground?
Yeah, it was mostly trying to use what was available. Although we did, in the wood area, look for novel ways of burning wood. And we found a prof at the University of Orono in Maine. Can't think of his name right now, but he had developed a wood burner that eventually became, what do they call it? Anyway, formed a small company here with some people from the Institute. I think one guy left to work with them. Should know the name of that. It'll come back to me in a while.
Right.
But it was a better burning, cleaner burning, wood burning system with a water storage system. And it would take 3-foot logs and burn them quickly and efficiently and do all these kinds of good things.
So when you were evaluating the results of your research, were you evaluating it primarily on energy costs, or were you also looking at pollution and other
pollution had to come in. We were interested in emissions, all those kinds of things, impact on the woods. We had a hydrologist from the Maritime Resource Organization, MRMS, look at the hydrology here, how much water we had, whether we could generate much. It wasn't very significant. I think we ended up with 1 or 2%.
Right.
There were no big hills, no big water storage. Although Malcolm I had a good look at the possibility of damming off a hunk of, I think it was the West River up near where we have a farm now, actually, because there were hills around it that you might be able to fill up with a little bit of water. None of it seemed to be economically feasible. So the economics are always at the basis of what you looked at, so it had to be reasonable that way.
So what were your early successes then? Where did you...
Well, I think it was establishing more of an interest in doing something with other kinds of local resources. The water didn't pan out very well, although we did end up, Malcolm McCann was in charge of, got some Katimavik people to work with him to fix up a dam in Pedalba, so it would work again.
Right.
Those kinds of things. But I'd say in the end, I was seconded to the first, to the Energy Corporation, PEI. So I was the first sort of executive director, whatever you call it.
And that was
a result of my talking with Art Hiscock and others Art was the deputy minister at the time of environment. And I think John Reynolds was the president of Maritime Electric. A couple of people on the committee talking about what we could do here. And it was from that committee's discussions that we ended up with the Energy Corporation. And then they looked for somebody to fill the job, and they asked me if I would do it for the first.
The Energy Corporation then, when you talk about the institute being focused on the individual actions, the Energy Corporation was more looking at
going to be something about something larger.
Right.
It was more in establishing industries here related to energy that way. One of the other things we did at the institute, we had some sort of free money from Alec Campbell and Andy Wells' tours of the country talking to, I'm pretty sure they dealt with it. I know Imperial Oil we got some from. I can't remember whether it was one of the banks, but somebody else. So anyway, we got about $75,000 in cash. So we used some of that to look at a district heating system for Charlottetown. So that was the first impetus towards the district heating system for Charlottetown. If you look at the final outcomes, it's hard to say what would lead to what. Shortly after we started our work, the feds were getting... The feds, you have to remember, 900 miles away, whatever that is in kilometers these days, maybe 1,500 or so. And to have two organizations like the ARC at Spry Point and the Institute of Management Resources, both using federal funds and somehow not working together this far away, didn't seem right to them, I don't think. And the ARC was having budgetary problems and managing their budgets and that kind of stuff. So they asked the Institute if it would take over responsibility for the ARC and remove it from the what were they called? New Alchemy Institute.
Right.
New Alchemy Institute. So we reluctantly agreed because we had a lot to do already. But we said, okay, we'll take that on.
But Andy had been involved in the inspiration for the Ark as well.
I
right?
suppose so. I'm not sure just what kind of a role he played in the Ark itself, but certainly John Todd, who was the head of the Alchemy Institute, was a real promoter. I can remember before I was even aware of there being a job here in Toronto, trying to get into a meeting where he was coming to speak. You couldn't get in the doors because we didn't get there soon enough.
Now,
At that time, that sort of stuff, and he was such a promoter, John Todd was. He was incredible.
in Alan McEachran's book about the Institute, he talks about the way he characterizes the difference between the Institute and the Ark. He talks about the Ark being nuts and berries and the Institute being nuts and bolts. Is that an accurate characterization?
To some extent, yeah. They were so focused on renewables and doing everything yourself. There was a wind turbine project that they were working on. When I looked at it, after we had some responsibility for doing it, I said, you can't develop that for less than $1 million, you know, because I had sort of some feeling for it from work I'd done with Voluntary Research and others. And so we hired the former president of Pratt & Whitney to review the thing. And he said, it'll cost you $1 million to do that. And they were hoping to just kind of put this thing up, and first thing you know, you'd have a wind turbine that you could sell, you know, and it never really did work. It's very complex technology. I think, again, it was Malcolm Lodge flying back from some visit somewhere, talking to a guy from Boeing. He said, it's harder to build a windmill than a 747,
Right.
just because of the different range of conditions that they have to operate through and all those kinds of factors and features.
So can you talk a little bit about the district heating system? Because I mean,
yes,
that's obviously something that grew
did.
out of that, and it's still here.
It's still here, yeah. Well, when I was with the Energy Corporation for that first year, that was one of the things we started to look at. And after I left and went back to the Institute, I think Rob, well, actually, I did the first analysis. We had, if you're going to run a district heating system, you have to find a source stored energy for it. And fellow David Baxendale from the Health Ministry here came to me knowing I was with the Institute and working on energy, and said, we have to do something with this new hospital we're going to build to find some way of a better way to find energy, or to a better way to heat. So we looked around at things we could do, and I said, well, we could use the garbage from Charlottetown and vicinity, because it's becoming a problem in terms of finding places to put it, and it's a perpetual problem. Has pretty good energy in it, so let's have a look at that. And we did. We toured, took a brief tour of the United States, mostly the eastern seaboard, and looked at some projects that were going on down there for burning. And we went to Hamilton at the time too. They had a energy from waste plant in Hamilton at the time. And looking at those things, we thought, well, it looks promising. So I sat down. I was in Ottawa, actually, and I had a little calculator, a $65 calculator that had BASIC on it. And I worked a little basic program out to calculate what the returns would be and how much money we might need from the feds and that kind of thing to run one of these things. And I tried to show, using the federal numbers for their projections on the cost of oil right up to the year 2000, right, to demonstrate that over a period of time, something like this could pay for itself and how much you could afford to invest. So we got $5 million from the feds, not on the basis of my initial calculations, but that was sort of the start of it. We turned it over to, I think it was David Arsenault at one of the local firms, who's now on his own with another partner whose name has come up again too, a woman, anyway, accountant. But they worked out details of the thing from there, and Art Hiscock, who took over largely from me, and I think Rob Brandon, who was hired from us to work with them eventually, pushed the project through so that you had firm numbers. We got the money from the feds. I think we got $5 million out of the $9 million. And I remember in 73, that Chrétien was energy minister and came down and opened this energy from waste plant.
And so what is it?
And that,
for those of you who
well,
don't know.
we looked at who had good technology for doing it, and it was Trisil, I believe it was. They were a combination of Tri somebody or other and CIL, and they had a good proposal for the technology. There was a competition. I don't remember the details of it, but anyway, Trisil got this process that's in there now. Basically, it's a system that gives you a pretty clean gas coming out of the combustion system. It wasn't as clean as it should have been, but subsequently, at the time, it met environmental standards. And as the environmental standards were made more strict, the process was improved, and dust collectors were added and all kinds of things. What I liked about it was that the specification was that it had to hold the gases. I don't remember the exact temperature. I don't think it was 1,000 Celsius, but at some temperature for a second or so, or 2 or 3 seconds, whatever is required to essentially destroy all of the hydrocarbons.
Right.
So what you're left with is fly ash, probably some mercury, which you can't get out that way, and those kinds of things.
So you're burning the garbage, which is
you're burning the garbage, which is heating hot water or making steam, whatever you want it to do. Right now, it makes some steam and runs a turbine that generates electricity for their own application.
Okay.
And in fact, David, I can't think of his last name, at the waste plant now, said that they would have produced more electricity, but they couldn't get enough buy-in from Maritime Electric to pay for the investment. So they just said, okay, well, we're allowed to do it for ourselves, so we'll provide our own.
So the water is then the heated water is distributed.
The heated water becomes the storage system, and once it's pressurized, I think it run around about 120 or something like that coming out. It comes back at 105 or 10.
Right. Oh, so it's
then they added it's doing the whole city, and the province really bought into it because they had a wood-fired system at the old hospital at the foot of North River Road, and they had a wood-burning system there. I don't remember. That one was actually going to be heating the hospital plus, I think, some of the government buildings downtown. But eventually, I think it was largely when Rob Brandon was with the Energy Corporation that they ended up putting together a plan to do the whole of the downtown.
And there's a separate system that the
the university was on its own system, so they had one there, so they integrated that, and then they took some energy from that, sent it over to senior citizens, residents, to various malls. The malls have now been incorporated, so anybody who has a big load, a decent load, has been included. It's still, I'd like to see them do the economics on supplying residences, but I think David at the Energy from Waste Plant would tell you that they don't have enough capacity,
right.
So we'd have to find other sources.
So this is.
And I think Wayne Macquarie again is aware of a lot of these things, and I think some of them may be going on without the public being aware.
So this is from a sort of a climate change perspective.
Yeah.
This is a good idea because you're not burning fossil fuels. I guess you're burning garbage.
That's right. There's a bit of fossil fuel involved because right now they don't have enough capacity sometimes. And at the time we started it, in order to keep the gases hot enough for long enough, they might have had occasionally to inject, I don't know whether they're using propane or what, some way of keeping the gases hot. But the bulk of it comes from the energy from waste and from wood. Now they're using a lot of wood because all these upgrades on the plant too have made a big difference. I'm not familiar with the details.
But presumably it also makes sense because you can, when you're doing it in a centralized fashion like that, you can upgrade in a way that if you had 1,000 little instances,
it wasn't novel in some respects because the Swedes, as I recall, when I first joined the program in '77, required any new heating system to be multi-fueled. Right. It had to be able to burn coal, oil, wood, waste, whatever. So it's just a logical outcome. If you want competition among the fuels, you've got to have these kinds of things possible.
Now, am I right in thinking that if you look at the ARC and the Institute and some of the other projects, EnerSave, I think, was related to the Institute as well.
It was run separately by the province.
Right.
Yeah,
But
and
I mean,
then they handed
that sort of,
gift.
you know, the spirit of the times.
Yeah,
let's
it
say.
was. Yeah.
Did that spirit go away at some point? I mean,
Oh, I think so. Yeah. Once oil dropped back down to, God, it was less than $10 a barrel. You couldn't compete with it anymore. So the Institute was gone by '85. We couldn't get money to do very much.
so because
Other than the wind. Now, the wind project came out of that, and I'd say that's one of the major things that came out of it, was it established a wind test site here. And Malcolm Lodge was responsible for negotiating with the National Research Council, first of all, and then the feds eventually turned over responsibility to that to Mines and Resources, as it was then.
But I guess if the driving factor behind all of this was simply the economics in large part, then as soon as the price of oil dipped below the capital cost of whatever you were doing otherwise, the as you say, the bottom sort of fell out of it.
Yeah, the first thing that happened, we started trying to make a buck from a for-profit sidearm of the Institute by installing solar water heating systems. Right. But as soon as the subsidy on the solar water heating systems was dropped, nobody could compete anymore with just electricity or oil or something. Even though, when we first moved into a solar house, so-called, that was built as a demonstration of solar across Canada, federally sponsored. And I happened to be able, we had an opportunity when we came here to rent the house. The system had been rushed in terms of its installation and everything else. The design of the collectors was a little wonky. One thing I did find out, though, was that during the summer, if you're running a furnace to heat your hot water, and you've got one of those coils embedded in the boiler, I should say a boiler because it's your boiler system, it ran at 17% efficiency. So you're burning more than 5 times as much oil as you needed to heat that water. Now, a good oil-fired water heater from 75% anyway. So you're burning at least 4 times as much oil as you should be. And yet a lot of those things continue to run. We had one in the old farmhouse we bought. So all those kinds of things, you became aware of, but doing something about it, you didn't always have the money for.
So now I think it's possible to argue that the stakes are significantly higher.
Oh yeah. Well, the oil has finally reached the price that it was back then on an inflationary basis.
So we have the oil, which is causing an economic stress, which is useful as a lever. Yeah. But then we also have
Then you have the climate change, which to me is I know Rex Murphy in a column a couple of weeks ago was crapping all over the idea of climate change because it hasn't changed in 10 years, and the hockey stick was proven wrong. It's just such nonsense that it's hard to know where to go to deal with, to tell you the truth, because as long as you read the scientific literature, and I read Scientific American and American Scientists. American Scientists a couple of years ago put together a panel of people to look at the climate change thing. The U.S. government has looked at it through a military-connected group that's responsible for forecasting what problems the U.S. is going to see. They said that the most significant problem they're going to run into is climate change. All this stuff, I mean, for Rex Murphy to suggest somehow or other that it's really just the flavor of the day kind of thing and isn't important. It's disingenuous, I suppose. There are other reporters. Gwynne Dyer has done a study, and he's talked to the Americans, and he's talked to everybody all around the world. There's just so much agreement on it. And I mean, my own background in fluid mechanics and heat transfer, I was working with heat transfer at low temperatures. Won't be much perhaps, but combined free and forced convection. I had an experiment where if I turned a light on at the bottom of this column that was carrying stuff, the whole flow in the column would change because of the radiant heat from the light. It's radiation being absorbed by the gases that are in the stream that I was running through. It's just so obvious that carbon dioxide, the American scientist group that looked at this separated out all the factors that they could find, 60% due to carbon dioxide, so it's the most important thing.
What would, I mean, having gone through the let's say, there might have been 2 or 3 waves of environmentalism popularity since the mid-70s, but having been so much part of let's say wave number 1, or maybe it was wave number 2 or 3, what's your advice to someone like me who's in the thick of it now, who feels a sense of panic on some level?
Well, I'm panicked.
Because I think a lot of the things that the Institute was working on, if they were rekindled, would actually, among other things, they would mitigate climate change.
Absolutely.
But how do we get to that point in a very practical way? I guess what I'm looking for is, what did we learn from having the Institute here for those years that it was here that we can now apply?
That's a good question. In some ways, it's the more things change, the more they stay the same. The plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. It's a difficult problem. I can understand it in some respects from a political point of view. It's going to cost money. Energy is going to cost more. As Dion found out, it's not wise to go around telling people it's going to cost you more. And so as a result, although I've been an NDPer for a long time, the NDP has picked cap and trade as the system. There's an economist, one of the BC universities, who says that the best way to do it would be through a carbon tax. But he says he'd never advise a politician to propose that because of what happens to them.
I mean, it's interesting to go back though and read some of the things that Alan Campbell said in very public forums in the 70s, which were, I mean, he wasn't talking about carbon taxes, but he was basically saying stop subsidizing oil. Because it's not going to get us where we want to go.
No, well, I'd say the same thing now. We're still subsidizing it. How many of the wars that the U.S. has fought have been subsidizing oil effectively? And if you look at the real costs, I don't know. I guess the economists are always two-handed, on the one hand this, on the other hand that. And we all are to some extent. But I just think that I'm panicked too. I don't need to panic because I'm 74. It's not going to affect me very much. But I feel for my kids who are in their 50s and my grandchildren who are in their 20s. It's going to be a hell of a time for them, I think.
Did you learn anything during your work with the Institute and the corporation and afterwards about Prince Edward Island, which leads you to believe that we are either very well positioned or not very well positioned at all to deal with this? I mean, there are those that would have you believe that there is something special about Prince Edward Island, and that it is because of its smallness or its the fact that it has edges, that somehow we're better positioned. Is that true in your mind? Or?
Yeah, I think we could be a lot more independent. I did some numbers last spring. It was the spring of 2008 actually, when the province was looking at developing their energy plan. And I put together a paper that this NDP went in and talked with Crooks about. I think it was first name. Because he was the sort of the exterior agent for the province receiving a lot of this information. And my estimate is that there's enough wood, according to provincial forestry estimates, that could be used sustainably to essentially provide all of the heat that we need. Now, I did some more numbers on it, and I don't know how good they are because they're sort of back of my envelope and calculator stuff. But there's a process that the Germans are working on, former East Germans. It's not new. It's a technology that was developed in the early 1900s, again by the Germans, but it converts essentially anything into diesel fuel. And I think we could produce enough diesel fuel to power both fuel oil and transportation requirements within the province. And that's before you even think about growing special crops for it. And the special crops, wherever they take up food land, I don't think we can afford to go to. If it's land that you can't do anything else with, sure, you want to grow some switchgrass on it or some other crop like that. Probably would pay off. But the worst things we're doing are things like ethanol from corn and grains. It's just ridiculous. You could only afford to do it because oil is so cheap right now.
Well, I wonder too about the approach we're taking to wind energy, because it seems from a sort of ecological or systems perspective, it seems as though in some ways we're replacing big oil with big wind. I mean, where it gets us environmentally is positive, it seems, but in terms of local control, which to my mind seems to be an important component of this, it seems to not be taking us where we want to go.
Yeah. Well, we talked with Robert Kiss and said, I don't think we should be letting private corporations come in and provide all this stuff. But we did say that whatever you do, make sure we get a good royalty for it. I mean, he was aware of that and would have done it anyway, likely. But it's wind energy right now is quite competitive with most other forms of energy. Certainly with nuclear. Coal is still pretty damn cheap out west. But you can't afford to put all that CO2 into the atmosphere. And none of those costs are being taken into account. And the disasters that are being caused, all these positive feedbacks from methane escaping, from less CO2 being dissolved in the oceans, and other people say, oh yeah, but the trees are going to grow faster. Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Depends on where they're growing and how much water they get and whether they get too much or too little. A lot of the forests that are being converted in Brazil and almost anywhere else that you do those kinds of conversions, carbon comes out of the soil. It's not being restored. All of these feedbacks are just so important. We used to call them deviation amplifying mutual causal processes. Just to confuse people.
Probably an acronym for that too. In so many domains, in terms of economic development, and certainly when you look at the documentation about the Institute, the notion of using PEI as a sort of a model system. Yeah. Scientifically, does that hold water? Does it?
Does for me. Okay. We're small enough that they can afford to take chances with what we're doing. If somebody were to back up the costs, and what we would be trying to demonstrate is that it doesn't cost that much, and that you can do a hell of a lot more. But the other thing we need here is a maritime pool at the very least for exchange of electricity. Right. And I've talked with Wayne McQuarrie about that for ages and ages. Before I retired 10 years ago, I said, we need a pool, we need to be able to exchange stuff. We have the best winds by far, certainly on the basis of population. The other provinces, I'm sure they have some places where they have reasonably good winds too, but nothing in compared to what we have. So I think we can provide the cheapest electricity. And I keep saying I don't know how much water storage there is. The only thing I'm aware of is the Mactaquac Dam. If you keep water behind that dam, it's your battery.
So you generate electricity with wind.
With the wind if you got it, and with the water if you don't have it, kind of thing. But the whole thing needs to be optimized. And then the idea that New Brunswick might sell their stuff to Quebec, I don't know what to make of that. But Carl Brothers, who was one of our hires at the wind test site, when it was a wind test site, did a calculation on how much energy you could get from all of the flooded areas in northern Quebec. The wind energy you could produce from that would be equal to what you get from the water, according to Carl. So, there's lots of potential to do a hell of a lot better with not very much higher costs, if any, when you start looking at the alternatives. And we continue to use more and more electricity. Who wouldn't? It's something that you can pay 15 or 20 cents for and can do the work of 10 people. So all of these things come into it. But I'm not a politician, so I can't tell you what we need to do. But from a political point of view, but from an energy point of view, I just think we have to do a hell of a lot more, and the sooner the better, in order to get ourselves away from, or to minimize the climate change problems. This 350 demonstration was interesting, and it does get people's attention, so I'm not denying that some of those things need to be done to get people's attention. And I think people are moving in the direction of being more aware of it. They're certainly more aware than the current federal government is, according to polls I've seen anyway. but they need to do something. But it's a hard sell. And I'm glad I'm not a politician, because I can sort of look at it from a technical point of view and say, this is just something we have to do.
And my sense is that the barriers to doing it are entirely either social or political. They're not technical.
Yeah, no, they're not technical problems. I don't think so, no.
I mean, we could get...
There are much better nuclear plants. Now, when I came here, I wasn't too sure I wanted more nuclear plants. In fact, I wrote a bit for the Angus McLean government that explained why we weren't buying into the Pro. But there are better ways of doing that. There's an international consortium working on better ways of getting energy from uranium. I think we get less than 1% of what's potential. And you could build that up to 20 or 30%. It's going to involve potential hazards. You make some things you don't want. But my understanding is that the final product, now my course in nuclear chemistry it's more than 50 years ago, but it can produce products with much shorter lived isotopes that will be hazardous, so that you'll be getting rid of the isotope problem within 100 or 200 years, rather than tens of thousands of years. And that plus getting so much more energy from it. If we continue to use the uranium, my understanding is if we continue to use it the way we are, you're going to run out of uranium very quickly. It's good for maybe 100 years or so. But you need to develop some of these new technologies. There's some fascinating ones being reported on.
So you're cautiously optimistic?
I'm cautiously optimistic, but it's going to take, it may take longer than we hope, because the 2020-2030 period is getting pretty bad. And as I keep saying, people say that we, on the sort of side of doing something about it, keep saying we're going to run out of oil, and no, we're not. The problem is we can't afford to burn it. And the same with coal. We're not going to run out of it, but it's going to be more expensive because it gets harder and harder to find. Again, you're looking at originally, I forget what it was less than 5% of the energy in the oil was spent trying to find way less. Well, and now it's approaching 15%. Well, that's expensive.
Yeah. And as we learned, I guess, from what happened here in the 70s and 80s, if you base a climate change policy or an alternative energy policy around the economics of oil, you live and die by the price of oil at your peril.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's the thing that if you think it's expensive now, I don't know where it's going to go. No, who does? We made a lot of bad predictions in the past.
I mean, it's remarkable though the change in the price of gasoline, how quickly people can panic and then think, oh well, we solved the problem because the price is half of what it was last.
Yeah. So. And $1 a liter now doesn't seem too bad, does it? Yeah, well, we came back to Canada in 1970. We were paying 29 cents a gallon. We drive up to my in-laws' properties, cottages.
I think that's a good place as any to leave it.
All right.